All right, so today we're going to do hacking Android devices, and unfortunately this one is pretty demanding technically. People who cannot run local virtual machines will probably not be able to do these projects today. I just this morning realized I could possibly put Android on my private cloud, and I did put some Android devices on my private cloud, but that isn't enough to solve the problem entirely. These activities are difficult because you need several computers working together. So anyway, let me give you an overview of what I'm going to do. The first thing is to install Android Studio, which is a free product from Google, and it lets you emulate an Android phone. And that will work on any operating system. So if you have a Windows machine or a Mac OS or a Linux machine, you should be able to just install that unless your hard drive is full or something, which I think is true of a couple students, or unless you're trying to work on something like an iPad. So that's the first thing. You install Android Studio, and it provides an emulated phone. And then we're going to connect it to Burp so you can intercept the traffic coming off it and pick up network vulnerabilities. And then we're going to root it. Just like iPhones, Android phones do not give you complete privilege over the operating system. You are running as a non-root user, so you can install apps and run them, but you cannot get into the system folders or mess with the operating system. And we're going to want complete control of the phone. So we're going to use a hacking product called Magisk to get root on the Android phone. And then we can investigate some apps, and this is where I actually became somewhat controversial, because when the first time I taught this course many years ago, I used some deliberately vulnerable app that some textbook author had written that was really out of date and really hard to install and really lame. And then I started auditing all kinds of real commercial apps, hundreds of them, until I found dozens of apps with serious vulnerabilities that were current apps in the store. And then I went through the normal vulnerability disclosure process where I would warn those companies, your app is vulnerable, and when they ignore me for 30 days, they became homework. So all my homework was real commercial apps from real companies in the store. You'd install them and then see their horrible security vulnerabilities. And I found them all over the place. I went through the top 10 banks, insurance brokers, and investment companies, and almost all their apps had serious vulnerabilities. And none of them cared when I reported it, so they were all used for homework. And I've got several old versions of apps we're using here. I haven't, in the last few years, kept up with whether they actually patch anything, but most of these people never patch anything. Android mobile apps tend to be terrible. Android apps tend to be much worse than iOS apps because the iOS environment is safer. So even though the apps are probably not written to a higher degree of security, the environment helps protect them. Android is quite dangerous, and the apps are quite terrible, as you're going to see. Anyway, then after that, we're going to modify an app. And this is the major vulnerability that most apps had. Oh, we'll do this ES Explorer. ES Explorer is an app that lets you explore the file system on your phone so you can save things and retrieve them, which they don't let you do by default. And it was very popular, and it was used for years by millions of users before anybody noticed that by default it opens up an FTP server with no password serving all your files over the network. And it was just sitting there doing that for years before anybody noticed. And so you'll be able to install that and see how anybody could just steal all your stuff, all your pictures and everything, as long as you're running that app. And then we're going to Trojan, the Progressive app. Progressive Insurance, like I said, most of the banks, stockbrokers, and insurance companies, has an app that is vulnerable to code modification. You can just modify the app, make a counterfeit version, and if you trick people into installing it, it will run and function as if the real one, but it will secretly be stealing your passwords. And I told them years ago, and they don't care. Nobody cares, but anyway, it makes homework for us. So those are the things we're going to do, and there's a lot of other projects here, but I think those are the ones I'll demonstrate today. So let me just point out the first thing you need to do here is Android Studio Emulator, this M140. Download this thing called Android Studio from Google. It runs on every operating system. Just install it, and then you create an activity, and then you create an emulated Android device. You just choose a Create Device option, and then you can choose various versions, and I say make a Pixel 3a, and then you'll have an emulated Android phone to use. And once you do that, your emulated phone will just appear here. My window is not scrolling correctly. All right. just like a phone, and you can go to Google Play and install an app just to find a flag. So I have you install a command line app called Qt, a terminal emulator, so you can execute a command and get a flag. So that'll probably take a while. You do not use a virtual machine. You cannot put this on a virtual machine. It has to have access to your real graphics card. So just put it on your normal computer, your Windows or Mac or whatever you're using. And so give it a shot. Yeah.
We should go ahead and do it even if we may not be able to do some of the exercises.
No, if you can do this, you'll be able to do everything.
Oh, okay.
The
So
only-
go ahead and get the emulator.
Yeah, the only limitation is if you can't even install Android Studio on your machine, then you probably won't be able to do today's projects.
Okay.
And there were a couple people that had a machine with the hard drive full or an iPad or something, and there's no cloud version of this. There are some cloud Android emulators, but they're all expensive.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to stop this recording.